Blast from the grassroots, connecting people and sharing ideas.
Hi, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And you are listening to Duran ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.
And of course, we are moving on to our Blast from the Grassroots session this morning.
Today, we are going to talk about the fragile state of media and internet freedom in ASEAN. With us is the Executive Director of the Southeast Asia Press Alliance. Am I right?
Yep, correct.
So today, we are going to share more about the upcoming event as well as a bit of introductory on the media and internet freedom in Southeast Asia. To start off, perhaps a bit of background of your organization.
Thanks, Arlene. Thanks, Gowri. It's really a pleasure to be here. I work with the Southeast Asia Press Alliance. It's a regional network of media freedom advocacy groups. So as you know, in Southeast Asia, media freedom is actually really under threat. So for the last 16 years, there have been attempts to try and promote the defense of press freedom in Southeast Asia. So this is an organization-based network that is operating out of Thailand, but we have members and partners in many countries in Southeast Asia.
So the decline of the freedom in media and internet, is it across all Southeast Asian nations or only probably you can say like Malaysia or Singapore?
Okay, there are some bright spots. So we should be really proud of those bright spots. We would say, for example, that Indonesia has relatively higher levels of press freedom. Philippines too, in terms of access to information. But in general, actually, the situation is rather worrying. So unfortunately, we would see that in most countries in Southeast Asia, the practice of press freedom, protection of journalists is pretty low, and I think we can say that it's on the decline.
On the decline. Which country has at least the better ones in terms of freedom?
Okay. If we take the Reporters Without Borders ranking, which comes out every year to look at the levels of press freedom in terms of safety of journalists, access to information, laws, so we need to step out a little bit of ASEAN. East Timor or Timor-Leste actually ranks higher than many other countries.
And they just gained independence.
Yeah, so in early 2000, they gained their independence. Brunei tends to be high, but I think it's because of absence of information about the censorship and controls. And it doesn't have very many cases of threats against journalists, but I think it's because censorship is very high. So you would have East Timor quite high, and then you have Brunei, which sometimes doesn't really make sense. But most of the other countries are pretty much on the lower
even
numbers.
Indonesia and Philippines.
Indonesia and Philippines, yes, because of one very, very important thing, and that is safety of journalists. So in Philippines, the threats against journalists, threats to their lives, Philippines is one of the top 3 countries in the world where it's actually considered the most dangerous place for journalists.
Even though it has media freedom.
Yes, and it may be because it has a pretty good solid foundation for press freedom, and there's a lot of attempts at investigations to expose corruption. There is freedom of expression, and I think that there are other problems within society that put the lives of journalists at risk. So while they do have press freedom, it is a threat to the journalists and the news outlets. So in general, it's quite low. But I think despite that levels of threats, I think we need to see that a lot of other things in the country, like Philippines and Indonesia, in terms of laws, guarantee protection.
What about Malaysia?
Malaysia is not very, very high. It's not very
But
impressive.
Are we getting better, especially
We are,
post
of course.
Mahathir?
Well, of course we are getting better, because I think that the most significant thing is the desire or the expression by individuals through different outlets and demanding for that space. So I think that it is definitely improving to the extent that people recognize that freedom of expression is something they need to fight for. Now, it may not necessarily be they don't just get it that way. You have to still work hard for it. But I think that you can say, in that sense, it has improved. But in terms of how the government reacts to the media, how it uses the laws, how it wants to shut down certain things, that is still very much the old-fashioned way. So there's that tension in that sense.
So that's why we have the online and the mainstream.
Well, even mainstream is online in that sense. I think every old outlet, the establishment, they are all online as well. So I think that may not necessarily be a useful sort of distinction, because, I mean, even the oldest media is online these days. But I think it's whether it's independent or not, and who owns them. Whether they need to be licensed, and I think that's where the big difference is.
But there are many challenges or issues that pertaining with media freedom. But if you can just name two key areas that is the reason why the media and internet freedom is in decline, what would that reasons be?
If we look at Malaysia specifically, I would say two, which the two would be the laws that prohibit free expression, and the kind of ownership. So the media is also controlled through the kinds of ownership. So it's actually a few who are owning a lot. So that's a problem for Malaysia. And if you look at the region, I would say it is still the legislative framework. So you have laws that are actually more punitive rather than protective. That would be a major thing in ASEAN. And also because I think a lot of governments feel that internet is, they have to be very careful of the internet. All these people lurking on the internet, just waiting to, criticize them. So I think that they are fearful of the internet. And at the same time, they want to control and they want to be still powerful on that space.
But, not for us to quote the government, but at the same time, the government are also concerned when it comes to the quality of the news that are being produced. Seems like, for example, in just one issue, many angles are being shared via social media, and some of it are blogs and non-credible sources as well. But so, from your point of view, because you want to promote internet and media freedom, but at the same time, how can we regulate all this information to ensure that there are no informations that are too off the charts?
Okay. So I think we need to ask ourselves who should actually really make that decision. I think the government is not actually in a position to make that decision because it has its own interests. So it actually is a very, very biased, and it has a very, very big interest in wanting to control the media. Often, I think, as we see in Southeast Asia, when they intervene, when they say that, look, this is not for public good, or this can affect public order or whatever, if you actually really analyze, it's not really a question of public order. It's usually driven by political interests. So I think the government is not the right body or institution to tell you whether this content is good or bad for you. There are other ways to determine that content. And with media, primarily it is public. It is the public that you are serving. And there are mechanisms that can be in place in order to check that actually you are doing a good job, or, hey, you might have crossed the boundary, but the boundary needs to be defined very clearly what it is. So in some countries you have like a press council, or you have public, like an ombudsman body that says, okay, now you may have crossed the line. But actually, I think even with blogs and social media, I think we need to know what exactly we are getting all hyped up about. And part of the conference purpose we're doing is to say, is it really dangerous content, or maybe just that you are annoyed by it? So we need to make that distinction as well.
That's true also. And sometimes even mainstream media can report something that is totally untrue. For example, Utusan, they just recently apologizes over a fake Catholic priest conversion story, which is quite interesting. Do you think good journalism is in decline right now?
Good journalism has probably always been under threat because there are many interests, like, of course, to get profits. There's sensationalism, so sometimes you exaggerate. There's also propaganda media, but it's always been a challenge to the media, these kinds of things. But I think that if we look at specific context, we can say that the big media definitely have increased their levels of propaganda and biased content. And I think there are some studies already released here in Malaysia in relation to elections, in relation to some of the big rallies, how the coverage was really biased and to the point of being lies, as you gave an example. So we need to be concerned by that because, whether we like it or not, they still have a wide reach. And it's going to people who are relying on that as sources of information.
And another area that I'm quite curious because nowadays media has transformed itself. It used to be, a lot of different traditional media trying to compete among themselves, but they still maintain that ethics, journalism ethics and reporting and investigation as well. But nowadays, you can simply set up an online channel, either is editorial or is it radio and such, and just report things based on what you think is news. My question is, how can this area be somehow, maybe not monitored, but somehow regulated without applying the laws or the government? You mentioned a body, but besides that,
yeah. I think, I should ask you, Arlene and Gowri, you did set up an online based media. And I think if you are confident that you are ethical, I think that is really the first step. Many of the big media, I think if you ask their reporters, they probably don't even know whether there's a code of ethics in their organization, which they should have and should be part even of their employment commitment that you need to abide by code of ethics. So I think that it has disappeared definitely because they are not being held accountable for the ethical practices or professional practices. It's determined by some other things like, are you pro-government or not?
Or profits.
Yeah, for sure. These two are really big, So I think that the practice of ethical journalism in this big media is missing. And maybe there are those who are individuals or smaller groups who are setting up their own who probably do a better job. And I think the thing that determines that is how much you are able to convince the public that you are doing what you can to verify information, to be accurate, to be fair to the different parties. You have to work on that credibility. It doesn't come on its own. So maybe you can do a better job than even the bigger stations that have been around for
But another problem that I foresee is for independent media to be able to exist besides the law is also funding, because the bigger media they have the upper hand, they have the tycoons to fund them, but for the smaller independent media they have to get their own funding through all the unique different resources, and sometimes it's too small, all these resources combined together. So how can the media industry move forward? Because if I'm not mistaken, in certain countries in Scandinavia they actually have certain tax where they will generate it. They will pour it back to the media industry.
Yes.
I'm not sure in Malaysia or in Southeast Asia is there any discussion towards that sort of creating an independent media.
So if you look at Indonesia, which is why I think it has a much better standard, is that in the post-Suharto era, they reformed their laws. And one of it is actually to guarantee support for community media, community radio stations. So there would actually be state support to be channeled to this really small, really limited areas, but to give them some kind of support. It's not the most ideal one yet because they're also facing their own challenges in terms of implementation. But it is one model where you have in the law that says you have to support. Thailand is kind of in there. They have set up
even though they have a military government.
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting political situation. All these stations come up in reaction to politics, and then they get controlled because of the political change. But there's actually a mechanism that was finally institutionalized a few years ago to regulate the community radio stations and where necessary support them or shut them down, whichever, So it is possible. And I think with online in many other countries, I think people are still finding ways how you can actually be sustainable. But actually it comes back to a very important point that you said. Political control is here, market control also is here. The big ones do not want to see anyone else coming into the market, So there is also a kind of a cartel to say, if you want to get a printing license or something, you need to be part of our gang or you need to make sure that you're not going to take our ads away, which is why Malaysia Kini still doesn't get its permit. One is political, but the other one really is a market issue.
Sounds like Astro to me.
Yes, it is. The day that it's challenged, we'll see that.
So you recognize there's a monopoly of media?
Absolutely.
In Malaysia or in Southeast Asian region in general?
It tends to be a trend, and you also see that the people who own quite a limited, and they tend to eat up all the others as well. So it just becomes the conglomeratization of media, and many of them are also very closely linked to either the ruling government or have really, really vast interest in other industries. So it is really a trend.
It is industry driven for some of these.
For some, it's
tycoons.
industry. Yes.
Do you think Malaysia has transformed from a media prima against all these independents to a few conglomerates, battling among each other for media access?
I don't think we have moved so much. I think the market has been a few players for a long time. So you guys are a threat, Malaysia Kini is a threat, So they need to figure out how to keep all of this away, and so there's always that pressure. But I think Malaysian media conglomerates are also not just confined to Malaysia. They're also abroad. They also invest abroad. So we are also exporting that kind of ownership structures. And if the political system changes, this also affects the media. So there's a kind of a mutual benefit to retain whatever the system is today.
Mm-hmm. I want to move back to a conference that you will be hosting starting from tomorrow, 15 to 17. It's a regional conference on media and internet freedom. Maybe a bit of sharing on that?
Sure. So in the last few years, we've seen quite a bit of debates happening between exactly what you said, about the big media, smaller independent media. There's all these questions about whether, excuse me, there's a lot of questions about whether are you professional like the others? And if you're not professional, are you entitled to protection if anything happens to you? So there's this tension that's going on, that if you're not with a tag, not issued by the Kementerian or, whichever ministry, there's a question of your professionalism. Individuals who run blogs, who may actually do their own levels of investigation within whatever limitations, if they are asked for their sources when they write a story and they refuse to reveal their sources, will they be accorded any kind of protection? So this is something that has been going on for a number of years. Who's a professional journalist, who's not, because of the online. In some places it's already moved. It's like, why are we even asking this question? Because media has changed so much. We should be really looking at each other in complementary rather than as a contest. And then the other thing that has come up is hate speech. Like, everybody is getting edgy, when there's issues of religion, ethnicity, it's exploding. People are feeling uncomfortable. Should we control the media? Oh, it's Facebook. We should go and tell Mark Zuckerberg, what are you doing?
He's now in Indonesia.
He was now in Indonesia. Maybe we should call him for the conference.
You should.
Yeah. So it's raising questions in the region where we do have some tension points. Whether the media is really responsible or whether social media is responsible for inciting. So these two are quite big topics that we thought, I think it's time to discuss here. It's been discussed in different points globally, but we have also quite a lot of challenges here. So we thought, let's put it on the table and see what people from different sides actually think about the situation. And then so in relation to that is also the laws, because you can't really not talk about the laws, you have to. And then the last part of the conference, or the last theme, is very, very much inspired by the whole surveillance, the American NSA spying on people, collecting information. Yeah, the Big Brother thing. Are we living in a Big Brother country and region? So these are the things that have inspired the conference, because it really involves and impacts the media, whether it's the big media or the individuals who are running, content and sharing information.
Mm-hmm. So in this particular event, they call it SEAPA for
our organization. Yeah, it's called SEAPA. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the whole conference, what kind of areas of discussion that people can expect? and if the public wants to participate as well?
So we have people who have registered already and some invited, mostly are Southeast Asia because that's the area in which we work. But we also have friends who are coming from Pakistan, from US, UK, who are also contributing. It's those main themes that I mentioned earlier, which is about offline, online debate. Is there really a divide? And then the question of hate speech. Is it really even hate speech to begin with? So we'll try to get some discussions about looking at certain content and saying, is this really hate speech, or is this annoying speech, or is just something you're offended by? What do you do with it? The questions about laws
And censorship?
and censorship, yep. And then we are also going to look at the question of privacy and surveillance. So it's not just going to be lecture style, like this is what happens, but we're really getting people to work around in a lot of group sessions.
And you have a lot of workshops.
We have a lot of workshops. So people can even suggest what they want to talk about and have groups and discuss. So it's really about learning from each other rather than saying this is what the expert.
So do you have the mainstream media?
Some,
participating?
yes, some.
So they are interested as well to
Yes,
understand.
yes, of course. I mean, I think there's a challenge now also in terms of, the problem with media being that they have so few resources. Trying to spare a journalist and an editor is like a big thing to come. But they've been very interested, so it's not a problem. It's just that I think it's good to bridge between the different groups that somehow still work with the media, either from the technology side, the individual side, or the big establishment.
Mm-hmm. So unless Mark Zuckerberg is visiting Malaysia, that means we will have participants from the media side as well.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, if he comes, of course, then we get the media. But I mean, he is a corporate. He represents the corporate in which we rely on for expression. I mean, like
Social media.
the social media is
Oh,
not.
will social media be part of this discussion?
Yes, of course. It is so central. It is really central because I think if you speak to any CEOs of media companies and ask them what is their new digital strategy, they cannot not mention social media even. So as much as they look at anyone else who shares information on social media as, you're not really that powerful and influential, though you're noise. But they rely on it too. They are on the same space as the individual, using Twitter, using Facebook, using Instagram to share information. So actually, it has really brought down the power distance. But they need to admit that it means they have to also change the way that they operate.
Do you also talk about citizens journalism?
Yes. This is definitely.
This is a new area, right? I
Not really. No, I wouldn't say it's new. It's just that I think it has changed over the years. The look and feel of who a citizen journalist is. I think it's always been there, but because of the ease in which people can share information with even established news networks, so that has changed a little bit. But it is central to all the discussions, particularly the one where we're saying whether does it really matter to be a professional accredited journalist to be able to produce content, because ethics, anyone can be ethical and anyone can be unethical, so yeah, hopefully we'll get people to discuss that as well.
So where can they get more information about the conference and about SEAPA as well?
Okay, so information is on our website. It is www.seapa.org. And then we have a link to the conference website, which is Media Net Asia. So we're bringing together media and internet, so they can find information there, and also information about what work we do. And this one, we're actually organizing it with a number of groups in Malaysia, like Empower, Center for Independent Journalism, the Center for Study on Communications and Culture at University of Nottingham, and an international group called Association for Progressive Communications.
So that's all for today. Thank you very much. All the best for SEAPA and also the upcoming conference tomorrow.
Thank you to Arlene and Gowri.
Thank you.